Hello folks, welcome back to Boss Economics World. Today we're diving into a topic that couldn't be more pressing, the North American trade war looming on the horizon, featuring none other than Justin Trudeau versus Donald Trump. So, buckle up for a thorough breakdown of this systemically problematic economic condition, in all its complexity, from local impacts right up to the global stage, and yes, we're going to debunk some of the reckless decisions that continue to drive the global economy toward recession. Let me start by stating the obvious: Trudeau has been reduced to a duck left quacking with words, but no leverage. When he says Canada is ready to retaliate against Trump's trade war, it sounds more like a desperate cry for relevance, more gesture than substance. According to U.S. Commerce Department export data, Canada purchased $320 billion worth of U.S.-made goods in 2024, making it the largest market for American exports by a long shot. Sure, Trudeau implies that trade retaliation might bite back on the U.S., but does it really? Well, we're going to unpack that claim thoroughly. Alright, let's pull this under the economic microscope. Here's what's at stake. Trump's administration made it clear that protecting U.S. domestic industries through tariffs is square one of its agenda. Trump is considering broad 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada, slapping a heavy price tag on what's already a mutually dependent continental trade relationship. Going back to basics, the U.S. and Canada don't just work side by side, they're practically economic conjoined twins. More than half of U.S. crude imports come from Canada, much of it from Alberta. That's 3.8 million barrels per day of crude oil flowing south of the border, supporting America's largest refineries, which are not configured for purely domestic oil. Canada is also the top export partner for about 35 U.S. states, far outstripping China or Mexico in most areas. On paper, billion-dollar tariffs back and forth may seem to balance out, but in reality, they deeply undermine each other's critical sectors, especially industries like steel, aluminum, energy, and manufacturing, where such interdependencies define the North American market. Alright, let's pull this under the economic microscope. Here's what's at stake. Trump's administration made it clear that protecting U.S. domestic industries through tariffs is square one of its agenda. Trump is considering broad 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada, slapping a heavy price tag on what's already a mutually dependent continental trade relationship. Going back to basics, the U.S. and Canada don't just work side by side, they're practically economic conjoined twins. More than half of U.S. crude imports come from Canada, much of it from Alberta. That's 3.8 million barrels per day of crude oil flowing south of the border, supporting America's largest refineries, which are not configured for purely domestic oil. Canada is also the top export partner for about 35 U.S. states, far outstripping China or Mexico in most areas. On paper, billion-dollar tariffs back and forth may seem to balance out, but in reality, they deeply undermine each other's critical sectors, especially industries like steel, aluminum, energy, and manufacturing, where such interdependencies define the North American market. Now, let's not ignore the gigantic elephant in the room: Canada's Western oil sands located in Alberta. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith notably flew to Mar-a-Lago to cozy up to Trump, lobby for energy considerations, and reaffirmed that oil must keep flowing freely between our borders. What's interesting here? Energy exports from Alberta account for an astounding 81% of Canada's total petroleum exports to the U.S. in 2024. Now think about it. If Canada decided to curb these exports, sure, it would wreak havoc in the U.S. energy market, but what about Canadian businesses? Alberta's energy sector alone represents $230 billion in provincial GDP, with tens of thousands of jobs and international investment dollars in the mix. Smith can talk up Trump all she wants, but let's not forget that the pipeline infrastructure connecting Alberta to U.S. refineries is already under enormous stress. Canada simply can't afford another bottleneck. We're talking about crude oil, the cornerstone of Alberta's economy, and a national revenue pillar that single-handedly props up prime ministerial budgets year after year. Now, Trudeau isn't just talking about tariffs, he also got impressive airplay by mentioning border security investments. Let's be real. Trudeau showcases Canada investing billions in drones, helicopters, and security tech, all to combat the tiny fraction of fentanyl and illegal migrants flowing into the U.S. Kudos for that, but is that seriously where our billions are going? Let's cut through the distractions. Fentanyl, for instance, primarily comes through China and Mexico, not Canada. Meanwhile, what we ought to focus on is the real threat: the creeping protectionism that's tightening along the U.S.-Canada border. In times of economic strain, instead of bolstering diplomatic and economic resilience, thickening the border costs both American citizens losses in jobs, Canadian businesses losses in trade, and ultimately, will drive up living costs. The border is thickening through tariffs today, but it's going to get thicker through economic barriers that cut off critical goods tomorrow. There's no denying that Trump's brash policies echo his prior presidency, where trade wars were almost synonymous with isolationist economic policy, but now, the stakes have risen. China is in a weakened economic state in 2025, with their GDP growth expected to decline to 4% in 2025, according to the IMF, and their internal credit crisis spirals out of control as seen through faltering Evergrande and Country Garden debt crises. You'd think North American nations would turn to collaboration at a time when China's global trade influences are weakening, yet here they are, slugging punitive tariffs preventing economic recovery. Meanwhile, Mexico has fast emerged as a critical manufacturing powerhouse, benefiting from geopolitical tensions with China, riding the wave of nearshoring and investments from American companies seeking to reduce their reliance on long supply chains from China during the pandemic disruptions. Canada ought to be recognizing the need to keep North American trade strong as a buffer against global slowdowns, but instead, its leaders are exposing it to unnecessary geopolitical distractions. Now we can't ignore the elephant in Ottawa, you know what I'm talking about, Trudeau's precariously plummeting approval rating. Recent polls peg him below 30%, arguably driven by a combination of recent political missteps, the resignation of Chrystia Freeland, and long-simmering economic mismanagement. The Angus Reid Institute reports Trudeau's early January 2025 approval numbers hovered between 27–29%, numbers that suggest real trouble as we approach the October national election. Freeland's departure was more than a casual resignation, it signaled that when a finance minister jumps ship in turbulent waters, key insiders know something's fundamentally wrong. Freeland, a supporter of fiscal conservatism, warned of costly political gimmicks, a clear shot at Trudeau's recent spending initiatives that risked running government balance sheets into deficit. She warned that a trade war with the US would require financial bandwidth Canada cannot maintain long-term. The broader crisis here. Canada and the US becoming entangled in tit-for-tat tariffs will do nothing but deepen the recession brewing in advanced economies. Let's pull up the latest data. 2024 Q4 projections from OECD show GDP growth in North America stalling to 1.5%, far below pre-pandemic recovery estimates. Europe is also not faring well, with the Eurozone tipping toward a recession due to energy shortages, inflation, and stagnant growth after the Ukraine war. When already complex economic conditions worsen through high tariffs, inflation gets exported, productivity shrinks, and living standards in both countries begin going the wrong way. The trade lock like the one triggered in late 2018 cost Canadian engineers, US manufacturers, and consumers alike billions. Prices shoot through the roof in both countries, from construction materials to everyday consumer staples. It risks squeezing the middle class, widening income inequality, and pushing low-wage sectors into deeper contraction. To all my dear viewers from Canada especially, you need to watch out for leaders throwing around strong-worded threats about tariffs, because these armchair warriors seem far removed from the economic crises that actual citizens face daily. Instead of retreating into protectionism, North American leaders need a reassessment of their continental trade negotiations. Canada's future prosperity doesn't lie in tit-for-tat squabbles or political grandstanding. The reality remains, real leadership will depend on keeping borders open, preserving essential ties, and maximizing economic cooperation within North America. Ultimately, this problem doesn't get fixed through fanning flames of nationalism or small-minded tariffs. Canada and the US need tactical coordination to navigate the complex post-pandemic world. Remember people, when leaders engage in reckless tariff wars, workers on both sides of the fence get burned. Until next time, remember, it's always better to question economic decisions that drive you straight into a ditch. If you enjoyed today's analysis, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and continue following Boss Economics World for all your financial and political news.